This is Jim with Twisted Hobbies. Today, we're building the Laser XL. The first thing we need to do is download the manual and print that out. That's ready to go. I also have the power combo from Twisted Hobbies, which includes the servos, the ESC, the motor, and prop. And then in addition to that, we also have the receiver and the foam tack, my favorite adhesive to use. Let's get going.
Okay, the first thing I like to do is take everything out of the box, spread out the pieces, see what I'm working with, and while we're doing that, we're going to fold over all of our surfaces. So we have our ailerons, I just put a battery on those, we have our rudder and our elevator, and we leave those for about an hour to sit like that, that way it loosens up the EPP and won't be stiff. Now we're going to put the stiffeners into the elevator and horizontal stabilizer, and I'm going to get out my trusty foam tack. I did do a dry fit on this just to make sure everything fit correctly, and then I just fill it with some foam tack and then use my little screwdriver to push it down. We've got 3 more stiffeners on the back side, and you'll notice that I'm doing this on top of a piece of parchment paper in order to make sure I'm not gluing anything down to the table. Now we're going to work on the horizontal fuselage. It's got some lateral stiffeners that go all the way down. Again, just fill those and put them into place. Then we're ready to work on our wings. So again, parchment paper underneath. You don't want to glue it to the table on accident. Here I'm using an X-Acto blade to prop up the trailing edge of the wing, so that way it is in the middle of the horizontal fuselage. I'm going to do that on both sides, so that way it's got the right incidence angle and it's perfectly neutral. You'll also notice here that I put the glue on, I press the surfaces together, and then I pull them apart, let it set for a minute, and then give it a full press together, and that works really well with the foam tack. Next up, we're going to be working on our wing spars, and we're going to cut the slot on the top, and that goes from edge to edge of the actual wing. You don't cut all the way to the edge. That would be cutting through the counterbalance tabs on the aileron. So just from there to there. Then dry fit, and then we're going to cut this to length. Just cut it off flush. Put your foam tack into the slot, and then I'm going to use a screwdriver to press this all the way down so it's just under the surface of the foam. And I did a little bit of touch up, a little bit more foam tack into the wing. Now we're going to do the same thing on the bottom side. And I'm using the slot cutter that I got from Twisted Hobbies. It makes cutting that slot so easy. You can also just use an X-Acto blade, but it's tough to get the consistent depth. Sometimes I use a piece of tape to help me with that, but using the slot cutter is really the way to go. And then you'll see me here just doing a little bit more touch-up. And now we're going to glue together our landing gear supports. So those glue together with some CA. And then I just used a little foam tack around the edge, slid those in. And they look great. Now I was going to put in the motor mount, but then I decided I should probably paint this because I like those to be black. So I did some spray paint on all of those pieces. And then we load up this area with foam tack. Let me readjust the camera so you can see that a little better because it's off the edge of the table. Okay, that's a little better. So then we're going to also put in the motor mount supports. They go from the motor mount all the way back through the gear support and provide a lot of stiffness up there. Then we'll flip it and do the other side as well. Then we add in the landing gear support plate. Then I was going to install the landing gear hold downs, but then I realized that I needed to have the landing gear ready to go before I screwed those in. So that means that we need to drill out our landing gear. And I just use a block of wood and then drill it right on top. Now we're able to put the hold downs on it. and get those screwed in. Then we'll start working on our wheels and wheel pants. So I'm going to drill those out, drill out the wheels, and then get them installed. And here's a little diagram that shows how the wheel assembly goes together. And then we'll start putting our pants on. We're gonna cut them apart and glue the outer edge. Then I apply glue to the pants mount and then press them into place. Then we're going to install the tail skid into the plywood piece. Next up, we're going to be installing the servos, but before I do that, I need to bind my receiver, calibrate my ESC, verify motor direction, and zero all the servos, which I do there. There is a more detailed video on that in the description. Then I will grab my control horns for my ailerons and all my other surfaces, get those cut out, and then installed into the ailerons. Then I'll be installing the servo horn extensions. After I get those fitting together nicely, I drill a little hole in them and then put a screw through, and then I clip off the back end of the screw and add CA. I would also recommend really double checking the manual for this part of the build because they have some diagrams that show exactly how they want these installed. They don't want you to have the servo arm perpendicular to the servo. They want it sort of raked back a little bit. So make sure to double check that before you get everything installed and realize that you need to take it back out and readjust it. The manual does include some templates that you can use, so that way you can line them up with the servo and the aileron control horn and make sure that they are in the correct place. Now that I've got those aileron servos in place, I'm going to work on the push rods. And I'm going to be using the calipers to make sure that I am creating them at the exact correct size. Once those push rods are done, I'm going to use this X-Acto blade to prop up the aileron, and then I'll glue in the control horns on each side. Next up, I'll be gluing on the horizontal stabilizer to the fuselage. I get that in place, I pull it apart, I wait for it to dry a little, and then I push it back together. You'll see here I'm checking for square to make sure that from wingtip to tail tip it's the same on each side. That looks good. This would be a good time to cut the channel for the servo wires. I waited until later to do it, but this would be the best time right here. I did a dry fit of the lower half of the vertical fuselage, and now we're going to glue it together. And then I'm going to use my little square here to make sure that everything is perfectly square. I checked the measurement again, and it's looking great. And the next order of business will be placing our servos into the fuselage, and we don't need any servo horn extensions for these. They just go straight in and get glued in. And we will also glue in the elevator control horn. Then we'll move on to the upper part of the vertical fuselage. We put our canopy in. And then I'll apply the glue here and then press it into place. I did have to trim a little bit of the area for the rudder servo, and it was able to fit in. Press it all the way down into place. Use your square to make sure everything is at 90 degrees. And then here I'm gluing in the support for the vertical stabilizer and rudder. And then on the bottom as well, you'll see that I've painted my tail skid black. Feed the vertical stabilizer into place. Give it some extra glue in there. Make sure it's all centered. And that looks great. Now we'll create the push rod for the rudder. And you'll see here that I measure the distance from the control horn to the servo horn. And then that's what I'm going to base my push rod length off of. The measurements in the manual were a little short for my setup, so I had to make it a little bit longer. I believe my final push rod length with the clevises was 189 millimeters. Okay, I've got those pins in, and now it is time to move on to the elevator push rod. Same thing on this one. I found 149 millimeters was my length. Yours may be slightly different, so I'd check it. And you'll see me using some sandpaper here to dress up the carbon fiber a little bit. It's just a little difficult trying to get it into the threaded brass piece. So I found that just giving it a little bit really makes a big difference in being able to get them snug together. And you'll see me here using a piece of metal in between the ears of the clevis, and I'm doing that just to give me some more leverage so I can adjust it a little faster. Looks to be the right length. Get those pins pressed through, and then we are ready to install the motor. Off camera, I already installed the ESC. You can see where the battery plug does come through the fuselage. That's really nicely done. And I balanced my prop for good measure, and it was perfectly balanced right out of the box. That's always nice. And then we're ready to set the CG. The manual gives a pretty big range from 260 to 280 millimeters back from the nose of the model. So I put on a strap so that I can do some fine tuning and adjustment until I really get it set for what size of battery I'll be using. And here's a couple shots of the completed plane. I'm really happy with the way that everything turned out on it, and I look forward to giving it a good maiden flight. So on this maiden flight, I probably should have chosen a day that wasn't quite as windy, but I got the plane up into the air. I was excited to fly it and see how it performed, and it did better than I was even hoping for. I really am loving the XL size on this, and it flies really nimbly, yet with like lots of power. So it's a fun one. I didn't even bother doing any trimming because it was so windy. I didn't notice anything that was off. When you build the plane with the surfaces centered, then usually you don't have to do much. It's just a couple clicks here or there. But overall, the plane performed exactly how I was hoping it would, and it continues to impress me. I think this is my favorite plane of this size because it handles everything that I can throw at it. On this flight, you see me flying with a 3S 2200, which is nice and light, feels really nimble. I am thinking about switching it over to run on 4S and bring down the propeller one size, and then we'll see how it runs. I think having the extra punch for it will be really fun. although it's great with the 3S. So I may leave it like this for a while until I get to the point that I want more from it. Since this maiden flight, I've put a couple dozen more on the airframe, and this tends to be one that I grab more often than others. So I hope this build video has helped you, and I hope that you enjoy flying your Laser XL as much as I do.